Hello, Tech Pros, episode 115.
Sometimes you have to be a supervisor. Sometimes you have to be a trainer. But more importantly, you should be a coach and a mentor.
Welcome to the podcast where I chat with professionals who are getting the job done using technology 7 days a week. Each week, we start with Motivation Monday. Tuesday is about productivity. Wednesday, leadership. Thursday, technology. Friday, people and communication. Saturday, entrepreneurship. And Sunday, being unplugged. All right, let's get started. Hello, Tech Pros. This is Chad Bostic, and I'm excited to introduce our featured guest today, Mike Crandall. Happy Wednesday, Mike.
Happy Wednesday to you.
Are you ready to lead us through this interview?
I am. I like the way you worked in the word lead there since we're talking about leadership.
Yeah, I try. Sometimes it's a stretch, on People Friday when I'm like, hey, are you ready to meet some people on the weekend as we leave from work? Yeah, sometimes it's a stretch. This one I like. Mike Crandall is a speaker, consultant, coach, and trainer focused on proactive business growth. He is brought in by business owners and executives to work on the behaviors, attitudes, techniques, and guts needed to be more successful in business improvement, sales growth, and employee development. His firm specializes in helping identify the blind spots and obstacles that are holding you back, and then implementing systems, behaviors, and guts to be more successful. Clients ultimately develop new habits that lead to proactive growth professionally and personally. And if this story resonates with you, audience, if it sounds a little familiar, that's because Mike was a prior guest on Hello Tech Pros way back a long time ago on episode 75, which you can find at hellotechpros.com/75, or if you're on iTunes or Google or Stitcher or Podbeans or wherever you're looking at, just scroll down the feed to episode 75. It's called How to Have Guts and Self-Awareness. And Mike, that was a people episode where we talked about the two biggest things that I took out of that episode was, first, you only have to be gutsy 5 seconds at a time. And when you said that, it was like you were speaking directly to me, because there's a lot of like insecurity and gosh, I'm starting this new business, I'm starting this podcast, and everything's new, and I don't want to know what I'm doing half the time. But that really, really spoke to me directly. You only have to be gutsy 5 seconds at a time. And any kind of decision, any kind of statement or question you want to make to a stranger or a potential business partner, man, you only got to just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Your question is over. Like, it's out there in the universe, and now you can wait for a response back. And then the second thing is that ACASH method, the awareness, knowledge, application, skill development, and habit that we go through to kind of our maturity as we learn new things, become self-aware of some of the obstacles or roadblocks in our own mindset or in our own, communication style, and then the skills and the things that we can do to kind of get better at those things or remove those obstacles and eventually turn them into positive habits.
Yeah, well, I appreciate the quick commercial back to episode 75 when I was the guest, and I'm glad that a couple of things really stuck out to you and have stuck with you over the last however many weeks or months that's been. So, that 5 seconds of guts is something that it doesn't matter what you do, and whether it's professionally or personally, it's something that and it actually fits in with leadership as well. But, if I want to do something that's different outside my comfort zone, I need to do it in little steps, and 5 seconds at a time is a good way to start it. Yeah,
absolutely. And I want to give you a testimonial. I actually use that very, very specifically use that method very recently. So last week I was at Podcast Movement. We were just talking about this, but I didn't tell you this story off the air. So I was at Podcast Movement, which is the largest podcasting conference in the world last week. It was in Chicago. And there I was amongst my people. I was amongst podcasters who, people who I don't have to explain, first of all, what a podcast is. Second of all, like how to subscribe to my podcast. And third of all, why the heck they should listen. Well, maybe I did a lot of explaining on why they should listen to mine. But it was awesome to be amongst my people, the people that got my media, that got my technology, that understood why I was doing it. But the deal is that I've always been such a shy person. And in last Friday's episode, I talked about, that difference between introversion and shyness. And as a shy person, it's really about that fear of being judged, that fear of people think you're weird or stupid or an idiot or, whatever. And so I've constantly had this fear inside of me and the shyness that's kept me away, especially in social environments like a big conference, where I would just kind of take my notes, sit off to the side, listen to the speaker, try to learn as much as I could, put it on paper, and then when I come back home, apply that. But the best thing I got out of this conference was on day number one. I did that, my normal habits for the first, hour or so of listening. And then after that, on a break, I was like, you know what? I need to meet people. I need to talk to other podcasters. I need to start developing relationships in this industry. And the only way I'm going to do it is if I have guts and self-awareness that this is a problem. And it's only going to take me 5 seconds. So take a deep breath. 1, 2, 3, walk up. Hi, my name's Chad. What's your podcast about? Do you have a podcast? And I started doing that. And by the end of day one and going into day two, man, I had a stack of business cards bigger than I could fit in my wallet. I had tons of new friends, like honest to goodness, real friends that I can call today, and met just so many awesome people thanks to that feedback that you gave me. And then my application of that feedback and trying to turn it into a skill. Hopefully it will become a habit someday in the future.
Yeah, well, Chad, that is awesome. I love that story, and I'm glad that you've applied it, put it into use, and just recently at the podcast convention. So good for you.
Thank you. Well, Mike, today is Leadership Wednesday in Hello Tech Pros. And you know what? It's regardless of if we're a manager or if we're just an individual contributor, it's all about getting everyone focused on the same idea and moving things forward and taking ownership of the situation and leading people into something new, right? And so I want to talk to you as you are a coach and a trainer focused on proactive business growth. I'm sure you have a ton of leadership stories and great leadership advice for us as well. But first, I want to start with something that's a little bit touchy around here, and that is the story of your worst, most horrible, just absolutely nasty boss moment. And I specifically say boss instead of leader because to me there's a huge difference. Now, we don't want to name names, right? We don't want to throw people under a bus and get called out or call people out on this show because we're professionals. But I think there are situations that we can learn from and behaviors that we can identify and put it out there and say, hey, these are maybe some things not to do. So Mike, can you tell us the story of your most horrible boss moment?
Yeah. First and foremost, let me share, I've been fortunate to have some amazing bosses, but I've also had some that were miserable.
Yikes.
So, my first grown-up job out of college, if you would, was in the transportation and warehousing industry. And by your request, and probably for a lot of reasons, I won't say the name of the person or the company, but went to work for this guy who was the basically center manager for a big warehousing distribution center, and I was part of the management team as kind of a young management trainee, if you would. And in the interview, he seemed pretty intense, but in the short period of time that I worked there, I learned that his entire methodology was basically fear and intimidation. And just by stature, he was kind of a big guy, just the way he stood, fairly tall and grew up on a farm in the Midwest. So, kind of a big farm guy, if you would, but, he just used to scare the heck out of people. And, that's how he expected all of us to manage as well. And that was never really in my DNA. So, it was a miserable experience. I didn't work there for very long, but, it was not fun or enlightening. And when I think about what I don't ever want to be in a leader or a boss or a manager, his face always pops into my head.
So what was that like working for someone who led or managed through fear and intimidation? So you were a young individual, you were just learning your own leadership style, you're working for this new company, and this, I'm picturing in my head this big burly farm guy that's just leaning over you, literally like standing above you, leaning over you, either hands on hips or finger in your face, and using a very sour, loud tone to explain how you suck at your job and how you need to get better. So what was that like of working for this individual?
Yeah, it was demeaning. And Chad, I got to share your visualization that you described. There's pretty accurate. I do have to say one of the things in working for him is that I was very seldom the brunt of it. For some reason, he liked me, and I didn't feel the negativity quite the same way, but a lot of other people did. Where I really felt the negativity was when I wouldn't I wouldn't, jump onto his idea of, fear and intimidation. Then I would get that from him. And obviously one of the reasons that I didn't work there for very long, but I saw other people take it far, far harder than I did. And, it was almost an environment that was about demeaning and belittling and, it's kind of, you suck and let me tell you why and that type of thing. So, but it gave me a great example of what I didn't want to ever be and what I didn't want to be known for.
Awesome. So what did you learn from this? So you recognized pretty early that this was not your style, that this style, although maybe effective for this individual, just wasn't in your DNA, as you put it. So did you start to come away with, what, my style is different and I need to act differently, I need to lead differently? Or did you say, man, I just need to get away from this because this is a negative environment? What was your takeaway from that?
Yeah, probably a little bit of both. I wanted to get away because it was an uncomfortable and awkward environment that I didn't feel good about. But on the other side of that, it really did give me some examples of what not to do and not to say and how not to act and what I didn't want to be known for. So probably a little bit of both of those.
Wow. So Mike, man, I think we've all been there in that situation where, regardless of if the individual is using fear and intimidation, belittling us, demeaning us, or something completely different, there's there's lots of awkwardness in management, and there's lots of, I don't know, just behaviors that we don't want to see, and we certainly don't want to do. So what can we learn from this situation, either as leaders ourselves or as employees who are working for leaders who kind of exemplify these traits?
I think there's a couple of things that can be taken away is that, first and foremost, number one, everybody has different styles, different thoughts, different beliefs. So, if you are in a situation where you're working for somebody who you hate working for, there's an opportunity to go get a different job or to start your own business. So I think that's a very important mindset to have first and foremost. But I think as you look at other leaders and managers and bosses, and obviously there's a lot of different ways to use those titles, a lot of it's also about what do you want to be? How do you want people to think about you? And how do you want people to ultimately remember you? I'll remember this guy for my entire life, and not in a good way. I have no idea where he's at. Our paths haven't crossed in 25 almost years. But, he had a big impact on me, but not in a positive way. And I guess if you think about when you're a leader, and to a certain extent, Chad, everybody has the potential to be a leader. Leader is not a title that's given to somebody. Boss is a title that's given to somebody, but you can lead and influence people in lots of different ways. And a suggestion that I give to people in an area that we spend a lot of time coaching on is, how do you want people to remember you in the future? And sometimes that resonates pretty deeply with people, and they go, I never really thought about it. Well, now that you're thinking about it, because most people don't want to be remembered 10 or 20 or 30 years from now as the bad boss who yelled and screamed. But sometimes we've got to reframe or repaint that picture about what's that going to be like in 30 years, and what can I change today that can change 30 years from now?
That's so good. You know, Mike, I have a horrible story about myself in this area. And it was, you talked about how a leader isn't a title, a boss is. Well, I was in a junior ROTC in high school. So if you're not familiar, especially if the listeners are outside the U.S., because we got a few of those, ROTC is Reserve Officer Training Corps, and it's kind of like a different flavor of Boy Scouts. It's very much tied to the military, and in our high school we were tied to the Air Force because we had an Air Force base in town or near town. And so, you put on the uniforms every week. You have drill, you learn how to march, you learn leadership attributes, and then different things, different vocational things about aircraft mechanics and just the history of the Air Force and stuff like that. So anyway, throughout that process, that was a 4-year process during my freshman to senior years, and somewhere around the junior year when I became one of the leaders or bosses there of the Corps. I always had this reputation of being just a very smiley person, a very happy person. I joked around a lot. I didn't take a whole lot of things seriously. And I got some feedback like, "Hey, dude, you need to toughen up. We're supposed to be acting like we're military here. We're pretending that we're military. You need to pretend too, and you need to put on your game face. You need to put on your warrior face and tell these young cadets, these freshmen and sophomores, like what it is and how they're screwing up and all this kind of stuff." And so during one of our outings, man, I just really, I don't know, I was having a bad day. I was having a bad week. And I took that advice to heart and took it a little too far. And I just became just a complete jerk, just a complete jerk. And I'm trying to keep it clean here on a clean episode, a clean show. But I was worse than a jerk, if you can imagine. And afterwards, I just felt dirty inside, just nasty, just like, man, that's not me. That's not how I act. That's not how I treat people. That's not how I want to be treated by other people. Where did that come from? Yeah, I had somebody tell me that I need to toughen up and act different, but that's not it. That's not for me. So maybe, I don't know, I need to do something else. So have you ever been in that situation where you wanted to act or lead in a certain way, but something just inside you came out, and it either came out intentionally or unintentionally the wrong way, and you just felt bad about it afterwards?
Yeah, I would speculate, Chad, that everybody's been in that type of experience. And a lot of what drives us, and this is applicable in almost every part of our life, but specifically in leadership, is that our subconscious mind steers most of our thoughts and our interactions, and honestly, a lot of times even what we do and what comes out of our mouths. And in my firm, one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is helping our clients learn a little bit about what's called transactional analysis. And for those that are listening, or for you that maybe haven't heard of that, transactional analysis is psychological theory. It says basically we have some recorders in our mind that record stuff, and then they play back at different times. And if you really boil it down, and I'll be very brief here, this is the type of thing that people write doctoral dissertations on. But the very abbreviated version of it is that all of that information is really recorded on 3 different tapes, if you would, in our subconscious mind. One is our child tape, where emotions are recorded. One is our adult tape, where logic is recorded. And one is our parent tape, where judgment is recorded. And what happens is that if we saw our father or our mother do certain things, or an aunt or an uncle or a grandparent, or some influential parental or adult figure when we were kids, we recorded that and we thought that was right. Now, whether it was or not is a whole different thing. But if we grew up in a situation where we saw maybe dad was a boss, or some type of a supervisor or a manager, and we saw him yelling at his people all the time, we just think that's the way it's supposed to be. And our subconscious minds recorded it as a little kid, and what happens is it comes out, and then it's easy for us to feel bad about it once it's happened. But that's theory of transactional analysis, and anybody that wants can Google it, and there's tons of information out there about it. But it really helps us understand why we do and don't do, or say and don't say some of the things that we do and don't do, and where some of that comes from.
Man, that's really, really deep stuff here. Talking about this transactional analysis. I'm very much an analytical person. So me. As soon as we get off this call, after I save my notes and tidy up my my podcast recording here, I'm gonna have to go out and do some Googling and do some research on this. I don't want to get really, really touchy-feely on my, childhood and the parental figures and all that kind of stuff to try to psychoanalyze myself, but just kind of understand maybe from the other person's perspective of where they're coming from and what they may be thinking. So, Mike, in just a moment, I want to ask you about how we can take the lessons learned from this transactional analysis. What's going on in our head, what's going on in our subconscious, and really learn from that in an applicational process, right? Where when we go back to work or we go back to our leadership areas where we want to influence people and get things done, that we can do so in a respectful manner that resonates with them and also matches our DNA, our leadership DNA inside of us. But first, we're going to take a quick break and thank our sponsors. This episode of Hello Tech Pros is sponsored by Minio Cloud Storage. Minio is a cloud object storage server for developers and DevOps written in Go. The Go programming language is the emerging language of choice for modern cloud infrastructure projects, and it allows Minio to be highly concurrent and lightweight. Minio is Amazon S3 compatible, built with microstorage architecture in mind, but at its heart, Minio is simple, scalable, and supported by a passionate developer and user community. In episode 89 of Hello Tech Pros, I talked with A.B. Periasamy, one of the founders of Minio, about the importance of community support and recruiting software developers who are as passionate about their product's code as artists are of their art. Check out that episode at hellotechpros.com/89 and check out Minio Cloud Storage at minio.io. That's minio.io. Okay, we're back with Mike Crandall. We've been talking to Mike about leadership, about bad bosses, horrible bosses, including the time where I was a horrible boss, and as well as what we can do to be a more effective leader. And Mike, you were just talking about this transactional analysis, this really historical stuff that's ingrained in our subconscious, right? So this child tape that records all the emotions, the adult tape that records all the logic and thinking, and then the parental tape that records all the judgment. So I'm going to go do some Googling and do some research and study up on this and try to learn some more of the history and the why fors, but break it all down for us. Like, what does this mean? What can we take from this analysis that's recorded on our brain? How can we take that and edit the tape into a best of mix that makes our leadership qualities come out and shine in a positive manner?
Yeah, well, I appreciate you sharing that. And again, I want people to be a little bit careful with transactional analysis. Like I shared, this is the type of topic that people write doctoral dissertations that are hundreds of pages on in their doctoral programs. So can be get disconnected fairly quickly if we're not careful. But again, it's kind of that people record stuff and then it plays back. And one of the best things that we can do is, if we agree with, and hopefully most people do, maybe not initially, but we agree with the fact that, you're right, I recorded a lot of stuff. Some of it's good, some of it's not good. I have to learn how to filter what I play back and what I don't. And you asked the question earlier about, doing or saying things that you regretted in a leadership or a management role, and almost everybody has, but right. We've got to understand, where did that come from? And, was that a conscious thought of, I'm consciously going to chew this person out because they didn't do a good job, or was it you chewed them out because somebody else chewed you out for it once? And maybe even after the fact, you went, wow, why did I do that? That wasn't very nice. And the same thing applies to parenting for anybody that's a parent on the call. It's very similar in what happens, but sometimes it's us just taking a pause and saying, okay, why did I do that? Or is that what I should do? And sometimes it's maybe even taking a 10 or a 30-second pause before we react or respond to, the situation. So, something goes wrong at work, you're upset about it as a leader or a manager, and, rather than go with your gut instinct and choose somebody out, maybe you take 30 seconds or maybe 30 minutes and say, you know what, Chad, let me process this and let's talk about it in a half an hour. Why don't you come into my office then? And then saying, how do I really want this to go? In our world, when we're coaching people, one of the things that we spend a lot of time on is the importance of pre-briefing and debriefing interactions. Now, when we're talking about sales, it's pre-briefing and debriefing sales calls, but when we're talking about leadership, it's pre-briefing and debriefing meetings, interactions, phone calls. You got to call somebody into your office to maybe praise them or, criticize them because of something that maybe didn't go right. And just even taking a couple of minutes to say, okay, I've got to call Chad into my office because this didn't go right. What do I want this interaction to be? What's the outcome I'm looking for? And even taking that filter and applying it and saying, you know what I really want is for this to happen. Now, what is it that I should do or say or not do or not say to move towards that? It's a concept that's pretty simple, not easy. Simple and easy are always different. But that's one of the things that we encourage people to really think about is, can I just take a step back and say, why did I do it? And what do I want to do next?
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. I completely agree with that. Both that it's very important and that it's not easy because we do have these emotional tapes inside of us, right? We have stress from throughout the day. We have whatever these situations that we wanted to have a certain outcome, or we didn't expect to be treated in a certain way or something, and all of a sudden there's these emotions building up in us. We're getting angry, we're getting afraid, we're getting anxious, we're getting whatever it is. And then if we just act without thinking, right, thinking about what's that outcome that I want when I talk to this individual, whether it's the customer service representative that's on the phone that I've been on hold trying to get in touch with for the last half hour, or if it's an employee that works for me and acted in a way or had a certain outcome that I didn't really approve or whatever. What is the real outcome that I want out of this situation? And think through, okay, now what are the right steps? What are the best steps to get that outcome without, like you said, without breaking your DNA, without breaking your leadership style that really makes you come across as a horrible boss or horrible leader. We don't want that. But what's that best outcome? And so the best steps that we need to take in those pre-briefing or debriefing meetings to say, you know what? This is what I was expecting. This is what I would like to see in the future. So maybe here's a couple of ideas that I have of how we can do it better. Do you see any other alternatives?
Yeah, and Chad, I like the way that you kind of repackaged the thoughts there and help the listeners maybe look at it from a different perspective. Because most of us, when it comes to leadership, we don't even take the time to really think about what do we want to happen, why is that, and then how do I do and say and not say the right things to increase the chances of it going the way that I want.
It's tough. I mean, coming from not just an introvert, but a shy person, every interaction that I've had in the past where I'm getting better and better over the last 10 years, but in the early part of my career, in my early 20s and even leading into my early 30s, almost everything was reactive. I didn't do much of anything that was really thought through. It was just like somebody told me something, I did it. They told me something, I didn't do it. If I spoke back, it was from an emotional state of either being proud or being scared or being angry or being happy or whatever it is, but just very much being reactive to the situations. And the thing that I've learned over the past few years is whatever you want, you have to ask for. You have to ask the other person. You have to ask the universe, but you also have to ask yourself, and that means taking a good look of how you're going to get it, right? So if you want a situation, like if you want to get into a manager or a boss position, and you have to do some leadership to get there, right? You have to be a leader before someone is going to give you that management role, if that's something that you're after, or if you just want to get a promotion up to a higher technical level, or if you want to start your own business, whatever it is, you're going to have to take some leadership steps, and you're going to have to convince other people that your ideas, that your products, that your services, that your whatever are the way to go, and that we need to get people aligned to that vision, right? But to do that, it means really taking a step back and thinking through what are those objectives, what are those outcomes that I want, and not just being reactive, but being proactive and taking that forward.
Yeah, Chad, you're absolutely right. And, one of the things, and some people absolutely cringe when I say this, and a lot of people even hate the thought of it, but, leadership and sales are very, very, very similar in the fact that it's about influencing and motivating. In sales, a lot of times people think about it as a product or a service. In leadership, it's more about ideas. But if I want someone to follow me, they've got to buy in. And this is whether I'm the CEO of a huge company or just a leader in my community or my church or my Girl Scout troop or hundreds of thousands of other things. But if I want people to buy into what I believe and what I want to have happen, and that's a big part of leadership, they've got to have confidence in me, and they've got to share some of that same vision. And being a good leader is also about being a good communicator, because I've got to communicate things in a way that other people can connect with it and embrace it. And again, that's far easier said than done. But if I'm that, and to use your example, that shy introvert that sits in the corner, I might have great ideas, but if I don't have the ability to articulate them and communicate them, chances of anybody following them are pretty slim.
Yep. Yep. And as the shy introverted person in the corner of the room, looking back at the history of my career, I'm getting so frustrated inside because they're not doing the thing that makes so complete sense in my head. They're, all of these extroverts that are talking over each other are not coming up with the idea that's in my head that is just so obvious. Like, hey, everybody needs to shut up for a minute and just think, and then they will come up with this idea that I have. And I don't want the recognition for it. I don't want it to be about my idea. I just want somebody to have this idea so that we can move forward. But instead, I'm sitting back in the corner of a room, keeping it to myself, not doing anybody any good. And instead, we have a lot of discussion and no forward progress. So if you're that shy introvert, sometimes you got to step up. Sometimes you got to speak up and say, hey, how about this idea? And just throw it out there and see what happens.
Yeah, well, and Chad, on the converse end of that, the best leaders, this might sound odd as I share it, but the best leaders recognize that and create an environment where everybody can share ideas. I always tell people that the best leaders are the ones who understand people the best. And they can draw ideas and connect with someone who's a tremendous extrovert, but they can also draw ideas and connect with someone who's a tremendous introvert. And if you're not spending time, and I think it's interesting and enlightening that you have, one of your topics every week on people and one of them on leadership, and they kind of go hand in hand. Because if you think about, when people, you ask somebody who they think of when they think of a great leader, they generally think about someone who's got charisma and has made others feel good. And a lot of times it's someone who's wired fairly similar to the leader, but occasionally you stumble across somebody who's wired totally differently, and you're like, wow, that's a leader who's done something right. Because if the leader's a tremendous extrovert but still makes introverts comfortable, or vice versa, just to use one of hundreds of examples, they've done a good job of creating an environment where everybody can feel comfortable and follow them.
So, Mike, thank you for pointing that out. I appreciate that. And that was actually very, very conscious on my part to have these topics, these 7 topics that I have: motivation, productivity, leadership, technology, people and communication, entrepreneurship, and then being unplugged. Because throughout my career, I have learned that the technology stuff, the bits and bytes, are only one component, and it's actually a fairly small component in whether you're in IT or whether you're in a technology startup or whatever the role is. If you're a technical contributor, if you're an individual contributor in a technical role, yes, you need those skills. You need to understand the technology. You need to understand how it wires up. You need to be able to do the job. But more importantly than that, you need to be able to learn how to relate to other people and how to communicate with other people and inspire other people, motivate them, lead them. And so really this entire 7-day-a-week podcast is kind of reflecting upon the aha moments I've had in my own career of, hey, in order to get ahead, these are the things I need to be focusing on. And so I have, like I said, over the last 10 years, been slowly incorporating them, slowly focusing on them, slowly, bringing them into my day-to-day life or my day-to-day career. And now as I start my own business, as I start my own podcast, it's not that I'm an expert in any one of these topics. Far from it. I am not the expert. I still need to focus on these attributes, the leadership and motivation and people and relationships and communication. I absolutely need to focus on this, because otherwise I would fall back into my old habits and my old patterns of just thinking about the technology, just focusing on those. And I know in order to make progress, no matter where we are, no matter what jobs we have to focus on these soft skills. We have to focus on leadership, on inspiring people, on, as you said, influencing people, getting buy-in on certain ideas, and listening to other people, getting their ideas out on the table, bringing the best out of other folks. So, that's why Hello Tech Pros is what it is.
Yeah, and I think that you hit some very powerful things there that, that buy-in from others. And again, it's an example of how sales and leadership are so similar. And anybody that thinks all things in sales are bad cringes when they hear that. But you've got to be able to create that environment where other people are going to listen to you. And it always takes me back, one of the favorite keynote talks I've ever delivered as a speaker. A couple of years ago, the American Marketing Association asked me to come speak at a conference. And I've spoken in all sorts of different environments, all sorts of different audience sizes. And it was funny, the person who reached out to me said, "We want you to talk about sales." And I was like, "Well, sales and marketing don't always get along. Why do you want me to talk about sales?" And I loved the answer, and I'm paraphrasing. It wasn't exactly these words, but fairly close. The vast majority of the people that attend this specific, conference, meeting, session, whatever they called it, work for somebody else, and they all want to be promoted someday. And the only way you get promoted in marketing is to have somebody else buy your ideas. And many times that's your boss. And so we want you to talk about how to help them sell ideas to their boss. And so I put together, it was about a 40-minute keynote talk about, how to sell to your boss. And it was just amazingly well received. And they shared with me that they do a lot of surveys. It was the highest rated speaker they've ever had in all the time they've been doing surveys. And the topic was just amazing. But, whether you're in technology, whether you're in marketing, whether you're in something else, if you want to get promoted, a lot of that is selling ideas to people above you where they go, "Hey, we're underutilizing you in this position. We need to put you in a higher position." And leadership's, again, not just the top. You can lead in lots of different ways, and leading up is an example of that. So,
Mike, that's a great story and a great idea. We're going to have to bring you back on another episode to talk about that in a lot of detail, because you kind of left us hanging here, a cliffhanger at the end of how we can get promoted by selling our ideas to someone, even if it's just our boss. So I think that's going to be a wonderful conversation that I'd love to have you back on the show to talk about. But for now, we're going to have to wrap it up. Before we go, can you share some parting words of wisdom for the audience? The best way that we can connect with you, and then we'll say goodbye.
So parting thoughts, I always like to share that in leadership, you really primarily wear four hats. And this is something that, might be a little bit broad, but it's a good parting thought. And when you're a leader, there's really four things that you're responsible for, and the four hats you wear. Sometimes you have to be a supervisor. Sometimes you have to be a trainer. But more importantly, you should be a coach and a mentor. And what happens to most people is that we default way too much of our time into being a supervisor and or a trainer, and we don't spend nearly enough time being a coach or a mentor. And the best leaders spend far more time coaching and mentoring others than they do supervising them. So that's something that I'd like everybody to really have. So as far as how to get in touch with me, always several different ways, but again, Mike Crandall, Crandall. Anybody that wants to contact me directly can email me, mike.crandall, again, Crandall, @Sandler, SANDLER.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. If you look for Mike Crandall and Sandler Training, I pop up pretty well. Another place that people can look for us is our website. SandlerOklahoma.com is our blog, or customgrowth.sandler.com is our main website. So several different ways to get a hold of us, and I know, Chad, you always do an amazing job of putting those on the screen when people look for them as well. So, but love to hear from people if I can help with anything, or if our team can help you with anything. And we've got a great newsletter. If anybody'd like to receive our newsletter, I'm very happy to sign them up. We've got a regular newsletter that goes out every week, just as a free informational one. And we also have a paid subscription-based newsletter that's much more tactical-based. So if anybody wants information on those, they can email me or reach out and contact me.
Awesome, Mike. And absolutely, we will have all of those items linked up on the show notes page. So the only thing, Tech Pros, that you have to remember or write down or type into your browser is this: hellotechpros.com/115, hellotechpros.com/115. That will get the show notes page for this episode. We'll have all the key takeaways that we've been discussing today, the resources that Mike mentioned, all the ways to connect with Mike, and a link back to that other episode. You don't forget, go ahead and listen to Mike's other episode at hellotechpros.com/7575, how to have guts and self-awareness. Mike, thank you so much for joining me on the show again today on leadership for the second appearance on the show. I really appreciate your wisdom and your conversation and your inspiration and your leadership, and appreciate you taking time out of your busy Wednesday to spend time with us.
I appreciate the opportunity, and hopefully what we shared and what you and I discussed is useful to the audience, and definitely look forward to being back when you're ready to have me.
Awesome. Love to have you anytime. Tech Pros, man, just think about this stuff for a minute, okay? Just break it down. If you're in a leadership position, regardless of if you're working for somebody else, if you're that boss, if you wear that boss hat, or if you're just, like Mike was saying earlier, just a Girl Scout leader, right? Or leader at a church, or you're a leader in the organization that doesn't have the boss hat, but you're trying to get the boss to do something, right? You're managing upwards, you're leading upwards. Those four hats, the supervisor, training, coach, and mentoring, the things that you really need to focus on are like the coaching and mentoring. And that can be someone above you. That can be someone next to you. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have employees or you have to have people working for you to influence them and coach them and mentor them, so that you can influence them and get their buy-in and get your ideas to stand out as, hey, these are really good ideas. Like, we all, the organization, should think about them. And if you are that supervisor, if you are that manager that has that boss hat, really think about trying to get the best of information out of all of your employees, not just the extroverts, or not just the ones that are your favorites, right? Because let's be frank, everybody's kind of got their favorites, their go-to guys and girls. But let's try to get all the best information, the best ideas out of everyone, so that we can be successful. You've been listening to Mike Crandall, and I'm Chad Bostic. And until next time, take care. The show notes page for this episode can be found at hellotechpros.com/115. Do you use Slack for team communication? Join the Hello Tech Pros Slack channel at hellotechpros.com/Slack. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review, subscribe to this channel, and check back tomorrow. This has been Leadership Wednesday, but tomorrow, my featured guest and I talk about technology. On Friday, people in communication. Saturday, entrepreneurship. Sunday, being unplugged. And then next week, we kick it off with Motivation Monday, followed by Tuesday, productivity. And then we're back again on Wednesday to discuss leadership. And I'll talk to you tomorrow.